If you've been in Lancaster any length of time, you will have heard of the Ray flood. There are books about it. Everyone talks about it. I did not know until the day that Rod organised at the farm recently about the Slow the Flow campaign, that actually it should be called the Roeburn flood. In fact, its impact and where most of the water came from was Roeburn. The fact that it hit Ray at the bottom of the valley and more people live in Ray, so more people were affected, is how it's become known as the Ray flood. But it hit home to me that actually the impact on Roeburn was huge. So I'm really pleased that Ron has come to talk about the work that he's doing up there, and I'll hand over.
Thank you all for coming. I'm sure we've got all sorts of different knowledges about rivers in amongst the audience, and sort of when we get to the end, do contribute what you can to what I've got to say. Okay, I'll start with how I really sort of got to the point of thinking there's something very wrong with Roeburn. It's from visiting Jordan. This is the pattern of the desert in Jordan, the gullies in the desert. This is the pattern of the desert in Roeburn. So it's a very similar pattern, steep gullies that occur in there. Right up at the top of Roeburn, we've got Mallardale Pike. This is the landslip that occurred after the Ray flood. This is the current situation at Mallardale Pike. This is landslipping. That's another area where it's particularly an area that had a fire in 1947. There was also another fire in 1982, and that damaged the peat, it damaged all the heather, and palatable grasses to the sheep have taken over. So the sheep have grazed that area a lot more. So if you look at the aerial photographs, you'll see sheep all over that area and not on the heather. Luckily, the Abbeystead estate, who own this area, they're very keen to do something about it. And there's just been some European funding that's going to help that project. So that's fantastic. We're actually going to get some action right up at the top. So this is one of the gullies. This is within 50 metres of the top of Mallardale Pike. So how it gets the force in that distance, I don't know. But the farmer who was working this land, he said there was a woodland in one area, and then there was a bloody gutter hole that you could put a double-decker bus in. And that was in the space of 2-3 hours. So a very quick process. This is another stream that comes off Whitmore, which is the common land. This is the area in 1965. You can see all this bare land here. It comes down here, comes off down the stream here. It's called Warmbeck, which has some significance because being warmer, it causes a lot more erosion. Warm water, cold water, heavy rainwater that's cold into warm water creates a rotational flow that digs out the riverbanks. So you actually get a lot more erosion on particular days, particularly with the summer flood. You get more erosion than you do in a winter flood on the banks. And this is the top part of, you can see the nip point where the peat's being eroded. That's moving at about 2 feet a year up the valley. And this is the landslip that occurred in Ray flood in 1967, and it's still eroding. This is another area on Roeburn Woods. If people have been to the camping barn, it's just next to the camping barn. This is just after the flood. This is about 10 years later, and this is now. So that bank hasn't stopped eroding in 50 years. It has a small stream, very small, like a tap at the top of it, but in a torrential flood, that comes to a stream probably a square foot that comes down that bank. So in particular conditions, it erodes very badly. This is the Flood Desmond landslip that we had. About 20 big larch trees came down and that was caused by that little diversion on the footpath. You can see where the footpath, where it ran off there, you can see where it came in at the top here, all that water, liquidised the clay and had a big landslip. If that had gone to the river, all that soil would have been lost into the river. This is another area on Goodber Common. This is a eroding peat hags. It's quite a big area. The thing about the eroding peat is it also changes the pH of the river. A lot of the peat is the blanket bog, which was originally here, is damaged by acid rain to start with, but then a combination of that and the acidity from the peat brings the pH of the river right down. It has been measured below 3. I've measured it at 3.4 pH. So it's a very acidic situation. It may only occur for one day, so it's no good if you just leave a measuring sensor out forever and try and record it. It's very specific points in time when the acidity occurs. With the Ray flood in 1967, this is Barking Bridge, which is higher at Rogandale. You can see how, and there aren't that many trees above Barking Bridge, and you can see how the trees built up against the bridge. Every narrow point where there was a bridge, the trees built up against it, and then when it broke through with a lot more force. This is the old farmhouse, Back's Bottom. This is the original farmhouse, 5-bedroom farmhouse, with hay barn, shippons, and all the outbuildings. So that was washed away in a very short period of time. It was about 5:15 in the evening. They'd been sorting out the lambs, which is in a pen right next to the river, and the water started to rise at that point. They went in for a cup of tea. When they came out from a cup of tea, the river was boiling, and as Bill says, it was like milk boiling in a pan. So it's that really rolling action that really causes a lot of erosion. And this is what was left at about 8 o'clock. So a very fast change. This is Ray Village. Before the flood, there were houses all along here. Along here, this is Bridge. This is next to Bridge End House, next to the bridge, and that was the bridge. And this is Bridge End. You know Bridge End Tea Rooms. That's the barn at Bridge End Tea Rooms. So there were 13 houses lost, 7 bridges lost, and the policeman says that the river level was 8 foot above the bridge. Gives you some idea of how high it was. That's an amazing amount of water that was being held back by trees. So that's the village before the flood. So those houses went, most of the houses on this side of the village went. And when this goes up right up a hill, and at the top of the hill there's an area called Smithy Brow, and the river came over Smithy Brow, came into some of the houses from the roadside rather than from the riverside. So it was being, the houses that were washed away were attacked from both sides by the water. Ruth Whittam, who was 103 or something when she died about 3 years ago, but she lost her house, and the trauma of everything being covered in mud, your few belongings probably fitted, that's her belongings probably. There's hardly anything was left. Some people just had one thing left from their house. One person had a little China horse that had managed to get swept down the river, and someone found it, and that's all that was left. So, from a sort of human point of view, it's a disaster. Down below the village, the trees built up. So hundreds of tons of trees built up. From our farm, I've calculated somewhere around about 700 trees went from the farm. So it's, those trees are going down here. Not just in here, there's household goods, but there's also the animals that were washed down on the ground. In flood Desmond, there was a lot less effect locally. There were a few landslips, but this is at the point where the hindburn meets the Wenning. There's trees where the two rivers meet, and a lot of trees built up there. But there's at least 100 tons of timber in that woodland, but that helped stop that from going further down the river. So what have we lost? Sticklebacks are lost, water voles lost, lampreys are lost, very few eels, very small numbers of brown trout, low numbers of sea trout. Is that what we want to leave for our children? It's not what I want to leave for my children. I want children to be able to really enjoy the river and to go off and catch sticklebacks as I did as a child. The rainfall over the period from 1961 to 2015, there were 210 records of torrential rainfall in Roebundale. That was an average of 4 a year. Flood Desmond was 100 millimetres in 24 hours. The hindburn at Ray was 2.94 metres deep. But it didn't cause a lot of damage with the Roeburn. Ray flood, so that's in 24 hours. Ray flood was 117 millimetres in 90 minutes, with a peak of 10 minutes up at high Salter. So a very short period of time. Also during that time, from 5:15 to 8 o'clock, the river changed course. So it went from one side of the valley to the other side of the valley. And then going back in time, in the 2nd of whatever night is, September 1892, the river rose 3 metres in 3 hours, and it damaged Smithy Brow. So the Smithy Brow is where I said in Ray the flood had come onto the road and then come down from the road and through the houses. That's the same area, Smithy Brow. So it has flooded as badly before. But one of the things that's important with it, we've lost the bottom of the slide, is that people remember originally the floods came up quickly, but they stayed bankfall for about a week. Now they come up and they go down within an hour or two. We've had it rise 1.5 metres in less than an hour, and it's back, next morning it's back down to nothing. These are floods over 2.3 metres, and that's where we get trees washed down the river. So that's what I base that on, is where I've seen trees coming down the river. Is around about 2.3 metres at the measuring station just below Ray. So that's one extreme flood every 2 years. In the last 2 years we've had 5 extreme floods. So we've got a changing situation to think about. This was on the 10th of October this year. This big tree is a big ash tree. That came about 300 metres down the river, but you can see the force of the river there. This is the peak for it. You can so it came up, and even within that peak, you can see there's variation. So that, I find that terrifying, that picture, really, because it means that the land above has no holding capacity at all. If that had, if it had come back to here and slowly gone down here, then I'd be happy with it. But it hasn't. It just goes straight down. So I'll go on to another. So these are some other things that have happened with Flood Desmond, but are also relevant to Roeburn. So this is an area near Newton on the river, on the Lune. This is a line of rocks that went across here that was put in as protection of the bank. When the river gets in full flood, you use the narrow gaps between the rocks as jets. So it jets water through those narrow gaps and digs the field away behind it. So all this, which is about a hectare, was lost. good agricultural land. This is another area in Kendal, just below the River Kendal, so just below Kendal. This is another line of rocks here. Again, the same thing happened and washed the field from there to there away. This is a groin that was put in as part of the fishing, but it was put in going from the bank, coming out downriver. And when it does that, it pulls the water into the bank and washes the bank away. So if we look at all the places where there's big boulders, where there's groins that have been put in, or big boulders that have been put in to protect the bank, at least 1 million cubic metres of soil, is my calculation, have been lost in flood Desmond because of that. So that's a sort of major cause for concern. In Roeburn Dale, the natural situation, these rocks here, they come out from the bank, go down the river, and that caused the erosion here. This is another area just above the ford, across the river is there. There's another line of rocks that again come out to the bank and go down the river. When the river comes through those, it hits the rocks and gets pushed in, so it rushes through, gets pushed into the bank. So all these are pushing the river back into the bank. So with the landslip that we had in flood Desmond, one of the things we had with that was a little stream that came down. And I had lots of soft mud and a stream to play with for about 2 weeks. And I put in little sticks and little stones in it just to see what happened with it and work out which way the river was flowing. And really through doing that and realising that every time if you put stones from the bank going out and upstream, so from the bank here going upstream, the water comes here and it pushes out to the centre of the river and it digs the river deeper. And it tends to deposit heavier material behind the rocks. So you can end up with a situation where you're building up the bank, using the flood to build up the bank and protect the bank rather than destroying the bank. And it also helps make the river deeper. There's quite a lot of work in Austria and the States. In Austria it's called in-river training, using this sort of rock formation. So we managed to get funding for putting rocks in the river as part of the recovery fund from flood Desmond. This is another horseshoe shape that we put in. So that's upriver, so it's coming down here. The river here hits the rocks and gets pulled into the centre. And when it's pulled into the centre, it makes that area deeper, so you can actually change the depth of the river in the middle of the river to make it deeper. So the flow, in a big flood now, the main flow concentrates in the centre of the river rather than digging out the banks. Similar interesting thing is here. I don't know if it's changed much, but the weir here is pointing upstream, so it's pulling the water back into the centre of the river. But what it's also doing is the water can change direction, but the rocks can't change direction. So the rocks go straight into the hydro input. So the shape of the weir will be affecting what's happening with the hydro. So what can we do about it? Natural flood management, lots of different techniques that we can use to slow the flow. And to try and, what we're aiming for, instead of this peak, to get below the sort of damaging flood level, we can get that so it flows on, ideally for about a week before it goes down. Some of the best fishing rivers in Scotland have a week where they stay bank full. A lot of it's because of the wetlands up on the high catchment are still intact. So we've talked about in-river training, just blanket bog restoration, grip blocking grips are like the old drainage blocks that were put in, drainage channels that were put in up on the fells after the war to try and increase agricultural production. And they've had a lot of effect on the river flows. So blocking those helps a lot. Putting in check dams, wooded debris dams. I won't go through all these, I'll explain them more as we get to the slides. So restoring blanket bog is one of the things that we can do. When we get this tussocky form, and majority of this is sphagnum, then you've got heathers, bilberries, cranberry, dwarf shrubs. But the moss itself will hold somewhere around about 80% of its volume in water. So you get a heavy torrential rain, and that can suck it up. And also the roughness of this slows the, the flow down. So restoring blanket bog is one of the critical things, I think, to protecting here in Lancashire and downstream. So that's one of the things that they're hoping to, the Abbeystead estate are wanting to do, is to bring back the blanket bog on some of the fells. Working with the idea of check dams. Check dams are a way of slowing the flow. So if you have a series of check dams, they might only slow the flow for 10 minutes, 20 minutes. But rather than it all coming round as one big rush, each of those 10 minutes adds up. So it might be that when you get to the main, say Ray downstream, if you've got, as in Pickering, they've got, I can't remember it, 300 or 400 check dams upstream from Pickering. They have slowed the flow enough to stop getting that peak that does the damage. This is a design from Michael Kravich in Slovakia, where they've had about 800 people employed putting in check dams. They've protected, I can't remember, it might be 400 or 500 communities they're protected with check dams, and also at the same time they're now finding that the weather pattern is changing, because their aim was to stop rainwater from leaving the catchment, only spring water. So what they're trying to do is get the water back into the land and let it come up as spring water, and for that to go down the rivers. By holding the water in the land, then you get the evaporation that allows that rain to move on to the drier parts of the country. Rather than, at the moment we've got a short circuit, whereas it rains, comes off very quickly, evaporates, brings more rain. You get this very short circuit situation.
So does that mean we'll have less rain if this works? Or will Lancaster suddenly become...
It's certainly one of the, if we can look after all the uplands, it will change the rain pattern. So these are more check dams. The thing about check dams is they leak as well. So they're not a solid dam, they're leaky dam, so they let the water keep flowing, but they just change the rate of the flow. Swales is another thing that we've put in. We've put in one that captures around about 70% of an extreme rainfall. So the idea is with that is they're on the contour, so the rain comes into the swale and it's spread all along its length. And we don't get any, in the extreme rainfall, we don't get any places where it runs off that quickly. The trees are part of this along the contour, and the idea with the trees is that their root systems allow the water to penetrate in and go back into the groundwater. In the Pont Brem project in Wales, they found that comparing grazed land to land that had trees on it, even trees that had been planted within 10 years, they found that there was 60 times more water absorption where there were trees than where it was grazed. Another system that I think it's important to look at is the idea of mob grazing. So at the moment we have a grazing system where people graze the land, they put on their livestock, they leave them on the same field for weeks on the same piece of land. With this sort of weather conditions, they get a lot of trampling, they get compaction of the land, and also because they're selectively eating what they want to eat, you end up with a situation where the soil structure starts to break down, and certainly the biology of the soil is very poor. The other thing that affects the biology is obviously the chemicals that have been put on the land. But with mob grazing, where the stock are moved every 24 hours, you don't get the problem even with torrential rain. You don't get the compaction. And it's a technique that's certainly been, there's some farmers up in the Lake District who are working with it. I've started to work with it, trying to work out how to do it on the farm. A friend down in Dorset who's working with it, and they're moving 1,000 head of a mixture of sheep and goats and pigs all at the same time every day. And they're, in some cases, they're not coming back for over 100 days onto that piece of land. When they're grazing quickly, the root systems of the grasses die back a bit, so that releases the carbon and the nutrients in the roots back into the soil, so you actually get a build-up of carbon in the soil. So it's a way of capturing carbon as well as grazing the livestock. And it also, because there's a lot of manure coming all at once, it helps to build up the soil organisms. Destroying blanket bog, I've mentioned that one already. Building healthy soil. The amount of organic matter in the soil really helps absorb water and hold it in the soil. If we put on over 100 units of nitrogen, we're going to kill most of their soil organisms. There's work by Elaine Ingham in the States, and she's talking about something like 75,000 species of bacteria in a teaspoon of soil. So we're talking about a very complex system that is needed to maintain a healthy biological soil. And if you've got that healthy soil, you don't need anything like the amount of fertilisers onto it. You're also building up organic matter and you're holding water in the land. So that's just actually getting people to think about how you run the soil, how you look after the soil, is very important. Another technique is to use keyline subsoiling. Keyline is where, if you've got a slope coming down from a hill, it's where the slope changes direction. So the key point is where you've got that change in direction. So from there onwards, so if that's the key point there where the slopes change direction, then making channels that follow the contour, or maybe going out away from this is where the stream would run normally. So what we're trying to do here is to take the water away from the stream back into the land. So this goes to the ridge rather than to the gully. There's a lovely little film called The Upward Spiral by someone in the States who works with a teaspoon. Goes out when it's torrential rain, and with a teaspoon he just makes little drainage channels. And he's managed to fill in the gullies just with a teaspoon. So this technique is just using a keyline subsoiler, which it lifts the soil, it encourages the root oxygen in there, it encourages the roots to develop. When you've got much bigger root systems, the land can hold more water as well. So that's another technique that's being used all over the world now to allow the water to go into the land. So how can we try and get this across to different people? So one of the things we've managed to get lottery funding to run a river festival, which we did in the summer, to try and get some local people in to understand what's going on. This sort of event. We're also making, we've almost got a finished film now. This is a farmers gathering that we had a few weeks ago. So we managed to get 8 farmers to come along, which was, we thought we'd only got 1, but 8 turned up, which was really good.
How did that go? Sorry. How did that go?
It went very well, but we don't know what conversations. It's like dropping a seed in the ocean, and we hope that seeds spread out. So it'll take time, but the storytellers, one of the farmers is a good storyteller. So if he's taken it on board, that will be really good. Then we've got a film, we're making a film which it's just about in its finishing cuts at the moment. We're going to have its world premiere at Ray Institute on the 15th of December. But hopefully that will again stimulate people to think about what's going on in the valley. What have we lost? Why have we lost it? And can we do something about it? And luckily at the moment there's funding from the government through the stewardship schemes and through peatland restoration schemes that can help farmers to get on board with it. So hopefully we can get the message through, then we can start to make some changes. So if anyone's got any, that's a quick rush through what's been happening in Roeburn. So I'm very happy to take any questions, any thoughts people have had.
So if all these things have been done or in place, how much of a difference would it have made in storm Desmond down here? Would there be a lot less water coming down the river? I mean, there would presumably be the same volume, but over a much longer period of time.
Yeah. I mean, the places where it's been, there's Honeycutt in Devon, there's area in Pickering, there's area in Stroud where they've done a lot of work already, and they've noticed that some cases it's about 10% difference in the peak, but we don't know really until we've done it. And it's also one of the main things about it is how much can you take away from the streams and the rivers, and you've got to do it at the top. It's no good messing around down here because you've already got the floods here. Whatever you do down here, you can dredge it, you can spend a fortune down here, and it's not going to stop it coming. So it's stopping it right at the top where we've got to do it. And to me, it's worth doing. So we get on and do it.
They're evaluating it. The Environment Centre, they're doing they're part of a big government-funded project that's trying to evaluate the effectiveness of different natural flood management, but at a catchment scale, which is as well as the scale you need to do it. And they're also part of the project that the university is involved with is modelling from what is happening and the evidence they've got, how if it was more widespread, what effect that might have. So using sort of firm that's very good at modelling. So looking at schemes like what is using and kind of projecting forward. But it's also new that they haven't really done the evaluation, so a lot of it's anecdotal, isn't it?
I mean, there's a report that came out about 2 weeks ago from the Environment Agency, which sort of documents what's been happening.
That we've noticed things involved with, so there's a lot of work going on.
I particularly liked when you showed a graph where it's sort of going up and then coming down, and there's another one that's curved like that, and you can see the two overlapping. And if you looked at the area under those two graphs, you could work out just about it's the same area in each case.
Yeah.
And that's so like that area that's what you've got to deal with. That water's going to be coming your way no matter what. And you can either have it come like that, or you can have it come like that. I think that was the point at which I totally got what you were trying to do.
Yeah.
And the second thing is I love the idea that you experiment with you have a whole raft of different techniques for dealing with it, whether it's sort of making channels with teaspoons or the dams which allow the water through, and all you can do is sort of experiment. And the picture you gave was a bit like a kid at the seaside, sort of trying to work out what's going to happen when the tide goes up, which of my defences will work and which ones won't. And it's very sort of pragmatic, it seems to be the approach that you're taking.
I've got a friend in Australia, and they had 440 millimetres in 24 hours, and they didn't get any damage to their piece of land. Every farm around them got devastated by it. They put in a lot of swales, a lot of catchment areas, so it's possible to deal with even that. And that's the third, what was it? I think it was 330, the highest rainfall in Flood Desmond in 24 hours. So it's more than the highest rainfall in Flood Desmond.
But it is also partly going, this is going to happen.
It is going to happen.
We may as well, or we really ought to do things that will, cross fingers, make a difference when it does.
Bear in mind different catchment slopes require different techniques. The modelling that results in a greater understanding of the flow rates and flow mechanisms that are into it. Is there any prospect of getting the funding to begin to cost out each of these measures and the time period over which these measures will be implemented to be effective, so that there is a bank of knowledge that's available which can then dovetail in with whatever research comes up and suggests might be an appropriate methodology of this particular slope, of this particular elevation, etc.
That is happening already.
Basically, we just don't have the data to cost analyse anything. We don't have any hard numbers for different measures. That's why Rod's like one of the first people actually doing measurements. We don't know how effective each of those cost analysing basically.
One of the biggest problems is that every field is different. So even if you do modelling, every field has that little drain. I've been looking at the Clover Hill allotments, and they're the problem. There's a problem there because one drain has got blocked. Because that's got blocked, the whole field, the whole allotments is getting flooded. And it's sort of, so it can be just one, or it can be just one branch that lands in a stream that causes flooding. So it's very small, subtle changes that cause the damage.
Okay, my one's about, I don't know what the answer is, but connecting the people in the length of the River Valley, that all of the things that feed into the Lune up in the high ground, all the people who own that land and manage it or don't manage it well. And then whatever comes downstream ends up in Lancaster, in people's kitchens and shops and pubs and all the rest of it. So it's something about how to help the connection between the people in one watershed, if you like, and what these people do with their high land has a direct effect, well, on people downstream.
I mean, there's a group that links through the Lune River Trust. We're setting up a group that's looking at the flooding of the Lune Valley. But really, the critical people are going to be the farmers. It's the farmers who need to understand it, and the Yorkshire Dales have just produced a guide for farmers on flood management. It's quite a technical detail, but it needs to be so farmer friendly. It needs to be at the auction mark. It needs to be something people can chat about at the auction mark, and that's going to make a difference. It's not people sitting in high places putting out lots of figures. That will get the money to come in, but it's the farmers who will make the difference.
Would you say that mock grazing is becoming more apparent in the farming press?
It's definitely, it's on the increase. I mean, there's up in the Lake District, there are at least 3 farmers that are working with mob grazing. There's a network of people, regenerative agriculture, that are working with mob grazing, seeing how it works for them. Because it's sort of, most of the mob grazing has been, in the past, has been done on fragile ecosystems. So the dry lands in Spain and Portugal are ideal places for it, where it's very fragile. But in a wetland area, people think it's not so fragile, but I think it is very fragile. And it's that understanding of what is fragility and how does mob grazing help with it. So it's coming. It's only in the last 5 or 6 years that it seems to be getting through.
One of the famous characters in agriculture is Rebecca Hoskin and Debenham. I think she knew of people who'd tried to select a particular mix of grasses that would mean that cattle would be out in the winter time.
They don't.
Do you think that's important?
I think it's critical to it. I mean, the cost with mob grazing is reducing it. You might change your lambing time, you might, things you have to change, but in the end, in most cases, you're not having to make hay, you're not having to make silage. So there's a whole lot of parts of the farm that you're changing in the process of mob grazing, and it takes a while to understand it. I mean, at the farmers' talk, one of the young farmers was saying, "Oh, well, mob grazing never worked for us." And luckily, there was someone else there who said, well, "I've used mob grazing for 2 years. I didn't believe it at all, but my farm manager persuaded me to use it, and it's been really successful. And I don't get compaction, I don't get puddling, so it works for me." And that was just down near Blackpool, where he's working.
Overall, is this a cost to farmers, or overall is it good for, if you can persuade them, if you will, is it good for them in the end, or do they have to give something up to do this for the benefit of us down the bottom of the catchment?
Yes and no. They think they've got to give a lot up, but I think you'll find that when they give it up, they'll have more productivity on the farm. It's sort of one of those, there's areas of eroding, take Whitmore, there's a whole lot of really damaged blanket bog there. If that's regenerated, then there's a lot more shelter on the area, there's heathers that can be grazed, and maybe with mob grazing on that area, you can actually get a different sort of grazing system that can make that as productive for an agricultural point of view. But it will take time to learn, because it's learning a new way. At the moment we've been so tied up with the fertiliser companies and the agrochemicals that our whole farming system is, you're told what to do you read the farming trace and it tells you what to do. It tells you what to spray on, what to do, and everything is based on that. So that's another thing. I can't remember who it was, about 2 weeks ago, someone in the government actually said we've got to get back and look at our soils because they're dying. And that if you can get that kind of, if you can get that coming out and really push it, then we might have a change.
Is there any precedent to it? I think there will have a part of it, the insurance companies, Lloyd's names, at the end of the day, they're the ones who put the bills when you get these massive floods. Is there any possibility of getting them to invest to mitigate risk?
It's certainly something that the government has been in the government white paper on flooding. The insurance part of it is a major part of it, which is looking at what are the insurance implications.
Recently about the worldwide insurance organisations, I suppose I don't know how their business models work, but logically you think that it could be beneficial to them to make some form of investment into land stewardship.
I mean, the people who are putting money in at the moment are the water authorities, because they're sort of finding if you can slow the water, you get much better quality of water coming through, much more reliable source. So that's one of the funding streams that's being tickled at the moment. the River Trust.
Well, what's the viability for getting some of these bulk areas and some upland areas back into trees? Is nothing in it for the farmers, or will it not grow trees? Like a lot of it used to be, way back. It used to be forest.
I think actually what we want to try and get is a blanket bog with trees in it. I think that's the direction we can aim. If you end up with a sort of forestry type situation, to get the trees established, you're going to be putting in a whole lot of drainage channels to get the trees established, and you may end up not getting them established. But it's working with the natural process. So we're working with birch and rowan, which like those upland areas, and get those established. Then I think that's a good starting point to work with. Whereas the opposite is actually saying, well, we're going to plant a biomass plantation here on this little blanket bog, which is what some farmers are doing, thinking, oh, that will slow the flow, and that's just as damaging.
I was on the Hampton Bridge somewhere, and they've had serious trouble with floods. It was my understanding that some of the landowners in the tops were actually doing detrimental, like they were burning the heather for the cover, because the shooting to promote their shooting. So even the environmental agency has had trouble making the landowners behave.
Yeah. With the burning, there's two sorts of burning.
Really?
There's a hot burn and there's a cold burn. And if they're burning the heather with a cold burn, then that's not going to get into the peat, it's not going to damage the vegetation, we're still going to have the vegetation there. So the first stage is to get people to work, to really understand what the burning process is and to manage it very, very carefully. And Halton Bridge, I know that the landowner there wasn't particularly interested in what they were doing to the land. They were just claiming as many subsidies as they could to get the piece of land. And we happened to invite the Minister for the Environment, or whoever it was at the time, to come shooting with us. Help them to keep their case. But he did actually end up losing his job. So I think, it can be managed, grass moors can be managed in a way that slows the flow. I think it's important to not knock everyone who's, but actually sort of work with everyone and say, we can do this, we can change it. So I think that's the direction to go in.
Do you see policymakers getting like I saw something about bees and pesticides in the news recently that seemed like, well, Michael Green gets this. Is this happening generally, or
I think it is. I think it is. My feeling is that actually this last year there's been a big change of consciousness. And it feels as though I just keep on hearing things that just all the time think, how did that get through? How did that get through? And it's finally getting through to consciousness. But I think it's really important for individuals to say, I can make a difference as well. When they had the government white paper on flooding, I wrote a 20-page document for it, and I was one of 150 people who wrote a document. The Farmers Union had a 5-page document. So actually as individuals we can actually make a lot of difference by actually stimulating the interest in, if we actually keep your eyes on what's happening, you can make a difference.
Just to pick up on that point, we don't as yet know what the government's 25-year environmental strategy is going to obtain in terms of substance rather than the political rhetoric we hear from Mr. Guy. What I was wondering was, what are your thoughts on the current expectation post-Brexit? There is an urgent national need to intensify agricultural production, and that includes reforestation and afforestation for commercial purposes. Bearing that in mind, and all the resilience and adaptation methodology that we've investigated, how compatible is that with the expectation?
I think the thing is going to be coming down to the sums. If you look at the costs of Flood Desmond, I can't remember how many billion pounds it was, it's actually sort of really getting to the cost of what the flood damage is causing, what the damage to our agriculture is happening, what our damage to our health is happening. I think those are the getting a real idea of what that real cost is and bringing that into the fore, rather than what the shareholders get as profit. I think if we can actually change the way that shareholders are benefited, if we actually, the first thing is to care for the land, then care for the structure of the company, and then to pay shareholders. Not that shareholders get everything, which is what happens at the moment.
I was just wondering if you think the Waterways Authority is proactive enough with flood defences, or are they just relying on people like you to feed them good ideas? I was just wondering if you think they're doing enough.
They're looking for people to help fund in water catchment areas. So at the moment they're actually actively looking for projects that they can help fund to slow the flow.
But they're not doing them themselves. So.
Not doing it themselves, they're helping fund other projects.
What do you feel about that? Do you think it's enough?
It's a starting, but it's in the right direction. Anything that's in the right direction, I think we encourage. Although you often wonder if, when Nestle are funding flood streams, you just think, well, what the hell's happening there? Which is one of the, that's one of the companies that is starting to help fund flood protection. So I think we've got to have some caution as well.
How the National Farmers Union balanced on this? My impression is that one of the big barriers. Are they learning as well?
They're learning slowly. But there's a lot of vested interest in keeping the chemical company. If you're at a university and you're doing agriculture, if you're studying organic agriculture, you'll never become a professor. It's that sort of system, because it doesn't bring the funds in. So it's where the funding's going, where the money rolls is where the interest lies, unfortunately.
I just wonder, in that week that you had to play with mud and stones, what you learned, and whether you learned anything new.
I just clarified for myself the way that rocks in rivers change the flow. So now when I look at a river, I can say, actually that bit of river there is causing that bit of erosion down there. Or that, in Bentham, there's just after Low Bentham, there's an area, the river comes down and it's washed away the road in Flood Desmond. And I can see where that flood came from, why it got washed away. That started with the railway bridge. The railway bridge straightened it's got a straight area, and that straight area then set off the flow that the river wants to do, and there wasn't the space to do it, so it dug into the banks all the way down. So once you've actually got an understanding of how it flows, then you can start to see what's happening. I mean, for years I thought rivers, if you put rocks in the river and they come from the bank and downstream, that will obviously push the river back into the middle, but it doesn't. So it's seeing it to understand it.
So the picture at the beginning was a comparison with a very different environment in Jordan.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of experience in environments that have had more, maybe longer experience in flash flooding than we have? Is there a kind of global cross-link?
There's a global cross-link through the Permaculture Association, and they've been working on flood for 40 years now. There have been people working with slowing the flow, holding water in the landscape. So there's knowledge that's built up over years with that. There's a whole lot of seminars at the moment called the Foundation, but there's webinars that they have about 3 or 4 webinars every week, and usually one of those is about mob grazing or restorative agriculture, and there's an amazing amount of knowledge out there of how to do it, but it's getting people to do it, and that's the problem at the moment.
Looking at the projections of climate change, increase inundation, to what extent do you think forward planning, in terms of the resilience measures you identified in your slideshow, to what extent do you think goals will be able to ameliorate, or is it something that we will have to respond to each individual extreme weather event and figure out how to do it? Whether it's worth doing something about it, or do we move back into recognition that some areas just have to be sacrificed?
I think there's no area that needs to be sacrificed. Every bit of land, there's people reforesting deserts very successfully at the moment. There's extreme situations where you think there's no hope, but people are finding the way to do it. Lost my thread. Anyway, no, I can't remember what I was going to say right at the... Just go back to right at the beginning of what you said.
It was the extreme weather events because of climate change.
Right, but the other thing is that Michael Kravich in Slovakia, he's produced a really interesting paper on the rising sea levels based on the amount of water that isn't being absorbed into the land. And his calculations, if you actually look at the rising sea levels, they relate to the amount of water that isn't going into the land. So he's saying it's not actually the melting ice caps, it's the water that isn't being absorbed into the land, which is a massive amount of our water body should be in the land. It's not there. The springs if people are putting boreholes in the Rhone Valley, they've got to go deeper and deeper and deeper.
It's a time scale, isn't it, to allow land to absorb all that inundation.
Yeah.
It's a different time scale as opposed to the rate of change in terms of extreme weather. These are only projections we don't know. It's a 66% projection. It goes on 70. Within that time. Different time scale.
There's also the one thing that's missing a lot is to do with the temperature. The water, as it gets to 4 degrees, it gets more dense. So if you keep water cooler, it absorbs into the land more. So actually, to get the spring waters working, it's about cooling the water. So the blanket bog cools the water. Once it's absorbed in anything that tree cover cools the water. So they all help with the absorption by changing the density of water. And it's actually getting that denser water that can percolate into the ground. It can go deep down to the ground where it meets it keeps it sort of 4 degrees until it gets down to into a hotter area in the earth, and then that heats it up. It starts to rise again, becomes less dense, and that's where we get the springs. And that's really what we're looking for. John Lawton in Australia, Jeff Lawton in Australia, he's finding that between 7 and 10 years he's getting the springs coming back to areas. So the area in Jordan that he was working, greening the desert, it was about 7, 8 years before the water started to come back. An important part of that was also things like the fungi in the soil. Once the fungi started to come back, he knew that he was starting to get success in the absorption quality of water. Just another thing on fungi, is fungi, the hyphae of fungi take water and they move it, they move nutrients. They move it uphill. In the woodland they move nutrients uphill, they move water uphill. So actually if we can get the fungal element back into our land, then we can actually have an absorption that you know, rain falls on the field, it can spread over the whole field, not just where it lands. So it's the fungi, I think, are a really important part of this matrix to make it work.
We need to demodify the soil for that.
Yeah. And they're saying a sort of fertiliser, NPK of 222 doesn't damage them. Not 10, 20, 30 or whatever most farmers are using. But in a teaspoon of soil, there's enough nutrients for an acre. So we don't need all those nutrients coming in. That's a way of making money.
So what can we all do to persuade every landowner in the Loon catchment to do what we're doing?
You can have conversations. You can have conversations with anyone you meet. You can encourage people to think about it. And I think, you know, it's by having conversations, and it might be if your great aunt lives in Roeburn, or it's those personal connections that will make the difference. So I encourage people to really think about who do you know who has land, and can you do something about it? You know, even with the land here, is there something that can be done with the land here? It's just getting into people's consciousness. What can you do? Once people start to see it happening, then they can think, oh well, that's why you want to check down. If you can't see it, and that's why we put in check downs on the farm, is so people can come and see and get some idea what it's all about. So, I've spent ages sort of going off to Pickering in different places to see them and trying, wandering around in the forest, wondering what the hell's going on, and having no one to tell me what's going on. So I think the sort of educational side is so important, and getting it into schools. In Bray, we put a school pond in, a camping barn, and within 6 months there's probably sort of 40 more ponds developed in the village. And it's that sort of process, that sort of thinking is, if the school kid comes home and says, why don't we do this on the farm? Then Dad says, or Mum says, oh yeah, maybe, probably Mum says, oh that sounds like a good idea. And then Mum has to persuade Dad to do something about it.
Can I just ask how what grazing will help with already poor land management? How will it turn that around?
Well, mob grazing started in East Africa, where it was very damaged land, and it was by mob grazing. It was the name's gone at the moment.
Alan Savory.
Alan Savory, who'd been a sort of game manager, and he was just sort of started to realise how important the animals were as part of that grazing process. And the important thing with them is the fact that they keep moving. So it was the big predators that kept the antelopes and things moving. And it's so in a very damaged land, by heavily stocking it, but one day at a time, it starts to bring that back. Or by bringing back the predators. So in Yellowstone National Park, they brought back the wolves, and that changed the water flow. So actually by the wolves keeping the deer on the move, or the elk or whatever they are there, that has changed the water flow in the park. So it's
almost like a natural process.
Yeah. And if we can get the beavers back, I don't think they might not be able to cope with Roeburn flooding. But if we had more trees up on the tops, then I think they could start at the top and work down. That would be nice to do.
Okay, well, thank you, Ron. We're out of questions. You can get your teaspoons on the way out for the next downpour.
If you want to see the film on the 15th of December at Ray Institute.
Is this the film that Brian is
involved
in? Yeah. And Brian was asking whether we wanted to put it on here at some point as well.
That's going to be the premiere, the world premiere.
After your premiere. So,
Yeah.
a big thank you to Rob.
Yeah.